And welcome to CoSA's July Member Webinar. And I'm going to turn it over to our moderator for today, John Metz. John, take it away.
Thank you very much. My name is John Metz. I'm with the Library of Virginia, and the topic we're going to discuss today is archiving minority and marginalized communities, and I can't think of a place where this isn't an issue. I know it certainly is in Virginia, and in many respects it's a tough nut to crack because it's overwhelming by the number of constituents represented in our population, as well as getting the trust and really developing a meaningful way to work with these folks. So the panel we have today is fantastic, and I'm very excited to introduce them. I'll introduce them in the order that they are speaking. First, we're going to hear from Dominique Daniel. She is the coordinator of archives and special collections at Oakland University in Michigan. She's a graduate of the University of Michigan School of Information, go Blue. She has worked in archives for the past 7 years. She has done extensive research on the development of archival collections documenting ethnic minorities at American and Canadian institutions, and has published articles in the American Archivist and Archival Science. Her next publication, dealing with the collections of the Ball Institute for Ethnic Studies in Philadelphia, will appear in the fall in the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography. Next, we're going to hear from Linda Trujillo, who is the State Records Administrator for the state of New Mexico, excuse me. We have not annexed a new state. The State Records Administrator is appointed by the Commission of Public Records and is responsible for the administration of public records of the Public Records Act and the State Rules Act, as well as portions of other statutes. Linda has a background in education and has managed multiple AmeriCorps programs and is licensed to practice law in New Mexico. She was elected to serve as a member of the Santa Fe Public School Board of Education in 2011 and again in 2014, and served 2 terms as board president. She also serves as a local representative on the New Mexico School Board Association Board of Directors and is currently president-elect of the association. In 2014, she was awarded the State School Board Member of the Year. Linda has an Associate in Applied Arts degree in Early Childhood Education from Green River Community College, BA with a major in Public Administration from the Evergreen State College, and a Juris Doctorate from Seattle University School of Law. Finally, anchoring our program today, oh, I got that wrong. Linda's speaking last. John is speaking after Dominique. John retired in 2012 after 12 years with the New York State Archives, where he focused on statewide efforts to build a balanced documentary record of New York's history, focusing initially on environmental affairs, mental health, and Latina history and culture. He served as executive director of the Center for World Music in San Diego and the New York Folklore Society, helped lead the Center for Traditional Music and Dance in New York City, and coordinated a 10-day multicultural arts for social change festival for Cornell University. John was active in the civil rights movement, including the Mississippi Freedom Summer of 1964. He is a facilitator for talking circles on race and racism in Ithaca and is active in the Ithaca chapter of Showing Up for Racial Justice, or SURJ. He has chaired or co-chaired several boards, including the New York State Historical Records Advisory Board, the Alliance of the New York State Arts Organizations, the History Center in Tompkins County, and the Center for Transformative Action, also affiliated with Cornell. So with that, I'm going to introduce Dominique, and we look forward to an exciting hour.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you all hear me? Is that okay?
Yeah. Yes, sounds great.
All right. So first of all, I would like to say that although I work in archives, I have not personally been involved in projects relating to communities of color and marginalized communities. My experience instead comes from my research, and today I'd like to focus on practical issues and share some specific strategies to facilitate outreach to such communities. Obviously, communities of color and marginalized communities in general are difficult to document, precisely because such communities are historically marginalized. At best, they were long ignored by the dominant society. At worst, they were submitted to slavery or other forms of oppression, cultural or even physical destruction. And in a way, they were all archival captives. Let me see if I can switch here to this. Yes, they were all archival captives, to use a phrase coined by historian William Hagan in 1978 while referring to Native Americans. By this, he meant that Indians appeared in the archives and in history as mere statistics, as subjects of policies designed by their conquerors, rather than as active agents. And that is in part because at that time, the white man's archives reflected the biases of white American society. So these communities are underdocumented and even misdocumented. And reversing those long-standing practices is not easy. As a result of their marginalization, communities often mistrust representatives of mainstream archives who want to reach out to them. So in my presentation today, I will point out some challenges relating to outreach to such communities. I will then present some case studies illustrating strategies that have worked. I will conclude with some key principles to keep in mind to facilitate outreach to underdocumented communities. Reaching out to marginalized communities and communities of color presents a host of practical and ethical challenges, and I'm sure you've all come across at least some of these or most of these. There are practical challenges, the most obvious being foreign languages and cultural gaps. Archivists, who are a mostly white and English-speaking profession in America, have to deal with a host of foreign languages and cultures, which contributes to the difficulty of communicating with the target communities and also of understanding which records are important and meaningful to communities. Also, archivists may have to deal with geographic dispersal, both of members of the community and of the potential materials of interest. Sometimes archivists are confronted to an absence of records, at least as archivists usually understand them. I mean by that meeting minutes, personal correspondence, diaries, photos, and the like. The causes of this are numerous, and they may range from poverty to natural disasters, genocides, and also lack of access to digital technologies. And last but not least, unequal power relations may generate mistrust. But there are also ethical challenges. Some have to do with the archival captive phenomenon. That is to say, the temptation to archive those communities' historical record on our own terms and to assume sole responsibility for their curation. Archivists rightly see themselves as professionals who have the expertise to preserve archives for the long term, and they mean well. But this can lead to treating communities only as the subject of collections. Another related issue is ethnocentrism. When we are from a different culture, what we as archivists think are valuable materials may or may not coincide with what the communities themselves see. And the meanings we see in these materials may or may not be the meanings that they have for their creators. Also, notions of authorship, copyrights, and privacy may be different in these communities, so that issues of access to materials or reproduction of materials may be addressed by the originating community quite differently from what archivists usually expect. So archivists need to become familiar with and respect all these cultural differences. Other challenges come from the digital revolution. Let's see, no, that's too soon. The digital revolution has generated a lot of opportunities for archives, of course, but as people have embraced the technology, the volume of records has dramatically increased. And some communities of color, especially diasporic ones, have embraced digital technology to create online communities. On the other hand, some groups may have limited access to these new technologies, making them less visible than groups that have a rich social media or online presence. So now on to the strategies that have worked, and I'll try to give you case studies for every strategy. The first one is social media archiving. And the example I will give is that of the Minnesota 2.0 project. This is a project that started in 2009, and it is an archive of social media, specifically Facebook posts, of Mexican, Somali, and Hmong teenagers. It is a digital archive supported by the Immigration History Research Center at the University of Minnesota, and it was created by undergraduate and graduate students there. So what they did is they simply selected Facebook posts and they turned them into PDFs. So they surveyed groups on Facebook where first and second generation youth talk about their lives and express their evolving sense of identity and social connection to Minnesota, to the United States, to their parents and communities, to each other, and to the homelands from which their families arrived. Such a project entails major privacy issues, of course. So the authors of the project use primarily Facebook public groups or fan pages because those are considered to be in the public domain. Since the materials were already public and accessible, they did not ask for the consent of individuals whose writings are now part of the archive. However, they decided to blur the picture in order and the last names of the authors of the post. Let me show you an example here. They also contacted the creators of some of the Facebook public group discussions in order to solicit their thoughts about the creation and development of the groups. The resulting archives is highly curated. The project creators identified a variety of themes that emerged among the discussions, and as you can see here in the screenshot, they organized the archive accordingly. However, the project is also community-oriented because it involved undergraduate students who were members of the communities in question. And the main purpose of the project was to highlight the importance of the 1.5 generation, that is to say, the children of first-generation immigrants. The advantages of this approach is that it's really easy to do. What they did is they simply took screenshots of the Facebook posts and they turned them into PDFs. Another advantage is that it documents transnational networks, because the groups that they documented were based both in the US, in the UK, and also in the home countries of the parents. It's a safe way to capture what could be very ephemeral communication, what's on social media as a very short life expectancy. Also, I think it's interesting because it's a project that documents young people who are often hard to capture, to document. Finally, it involves them in the archiving project, to some degree at least, and therefore it's a way to demonstrate to them that archivists care, that they value and respect the culture of these communities, and this may facilitate outreach to other members of the same communities or even other communities in the future. The drawbacks of the project, of course, is that it can't be searched. It's static rather than dynamic, and it's organized in ways that are determined primarily, at least by the authors, with relatively little input from the youth who were surveyed. Another strategy addresses some of these problems. It's what the authors call digital participatory microhistory. And I'll take as an example the South Asian American Digital Archive. They started in 2013 what they call the First Days Project, which is a community-based online project that solicits short audio, video, and written narratives about South Asian immigrants' first day in the United States. the authors of the project recognized that there was a gap in documentation in that regard. The first experiences of immigrants in the United States are not really being documented or archived. So on this website, people are encouraged to submit via a simple form audio and video recordings of no more than 3 minutes and very brief textual submissions. I think it's 500 words maximum. And the submissions can be searched or browsed online. So I'd like to show you what this website looks like, and I'm going to try and share my screen with you. Let's see. Can you all see my screen? Which is the...
We can.
And the amount? Okay, very good, thank you. So this is the website of First Days Project, and as you can see, you can share your story here directly. And this takes you to a very simple form in which you enter your contact information and also some metadata about who may be interviewing who. And then in the second part of the form, you upload your audio, video, text document and give some permissions, and that's it. Once the document in question is online, users can browse them and search them in different ways. You see here there's a timeline that takes you to all these different archives. You can also browse a map of the world to see how the different stories cover different parts of the world. And if you go to the gallery, you're going to be given a lot of different options actually to browse by departure country, by arrival state, and you have all 50 states here, by year, etc. So the website is really interesting to explore. It benefited from the success of the institution that gave rise to it, which is, as you can see here at the bottom, the South Asian American Digital Archive, which had already established connections with South Asian communities. SADA is a nonprofit. It has an executive director and executive board who are of South Asian origin. So let me see if I can now go back to my presentation. Is this working correctly? Am I back in the, I guess, oops. I'm not sure I am. I can't see. Okay, here we are.
Yes,
so,
there you go.
This is what they call digital participatory microhistory, which is not that different from oral histories. As you can see from this definition that they give, any programmatic activity that uses internet-based technologies to encourage community members to directly create short records for inclusion in an archive. But there are differences, and the first one is that we're talking here about interactive digital technologies, both from the point of view of those who upload the documents and the point of view of the users. And secondly, the main difference with oral histories is that the project must facilitate the generation of new records directly by users themselves. Right. And of course, the resulting documents or records must document some past event, and the creators of the document must agree to have their story made publicly accessible. The advantages of this kind of project is that it helps document communities that are underrepresented or misrepresented. It provides direct access to their own voices in their own terms with minimal curation on the part of archivists. And above all, it shows them that archives value their everyday experiences, and it gets community members to value archives in their turn. It introduces a personal, emotional connection to the archives. It shows people that archives are not just about evidence and authenticity. And if community members are involved in this way, they are more likely to donate other material later. So obviously, there's also some drawbacks to this kind of project. The first one is that it's relatively complex in terms of technology and organization. it's not easy to implement without appropriate funding and expertise. It's also complex in that it gives a primary role to the members of the communities themselves, and all the stories they submit may not be original, interesting, or even relevant in the sense that, well, archivists don't have full control over what kind of stories are being uploaded. Finally, I'll mention another strategy, which is that of archiving digital surrogates. And I'll take as an example the Southern Nevada Jewish Heritage Project, which is a project at the University of Nevada. Archivists there have chosen the scan and return approach, and they digitize original materials and return them to their owners, and they just keep the digital surrogates. Of course, archives traditionally frown on such an approach, but they argue that it is better to do this than not getting any documentation at all. And they argue further that it can actually provide some benefits. By the way, this is the approach that's used by the SADA project that I just showed you before. They don't have any physical collections. It's all surrogates. In the case of this project, the archivist decided to document the history of the Jewish community in Las Vegas, but there were few formal records, and what does exist is in the hands of private individuals who have emotional ties to it, which is a rather common situation. That's why they adopted the scan and return approach, and they posted the guidelines online on the project blog so that potential participants would know what kind of material was of interest to them. They already had a few connections to individuals in that community. Then they used a loan reproduction agreement with volunteers instead of a deed of gift, and they treated the loaned material just like the permanent collection they digitized. They created a finding aid. They published the digital surrogates in their Content DM archive. It looks like this, and returned to the originals to their owners. So I don't have time to take you to their website, but you would see in the metadata below that it does say that this is only a digital surrogate and there is no physical collection linked to that document. The advantage of this strategy is that it provides access to material that would be otherwise inaccessible, and it's also a way to ensure the long-term preservation of such materials. But above all, they argue it is a powerful way to build community relationships. The willingness to not take custody of original materials may actually help establish trust and demonstrate to the community the benefits of a permanent archive. So rather than custody, they emphasize collaboration and partnership. And this may be a good method to reach out to minorities with which there has been no relationship before, or minorities that are used to having their heritage taken away by the dominant society, like Native Americans. Drawbacks associated with this approach is, of course, the fact that there are no physical collections linked to this digital archive. And administrators and staff may have some concerns about investing resources on material that is not owned by the institution. Obviously, there's the same problems that affect digital preservation of any digital material apply here. And there's another problem, which is that humans generally prefer to work with physical originals, which may cast some doubt as to digital surrogates will be accepted and used by researchers. What is clear, though, is that outreach is not and should not be just a one-time effort. Any activity, even small, that involves members of the community over their heritage and history can contribute to building trust over time, which is a necessary factor for later acquisitions. And it is the multiplication of small acts of collaboration over time that make for strong outreach. In the case of the microhistories, for example, the authors claim that they were very successful at getting community members involved through their Facebook page, through which they had solicited translations, for example, translations of materials in their collection. and also contextual information about photographic records, questions to ask the subjects of oral history interviews, etc. So they solicited help repeatedly via social media, and were quite successful at building relationships in that way. So to conclude, I would like to outline some key principles that I think people should think about for any archiving project that involves underdocumented communities. First of all, I'd like to emphasize the Helen Samuels documentation theory, which posited that you should consider intervening in the records creation process. She meant by this that archivists should not be concerned just about what actually exists, but about what should exist. And this means that outreach is particularly important even before any specific archiving project is planned. Archivists cannot just wait for community members to contact them and to accept whatever is offered to them. They should take an active role in collecting, appraising, and even creating records, as in the case of the microhistories I just showed you. Here are a few other concepts that I think people should keep in mind as well. The first, for any project, you should consider what communities face in their effort to archive their own history, what their needs are in terms of archiving, and therefore develop strategies to help them address those needs. For example, we know that the minority press faces specific challenges such as inadequate physical and digital space, limited personnel and financial resources, and the lack of technological know-how for archiving the newspapers. Secondly, archivists strive to have a diversified or representative record of history, so we should remember to not treat the community as monolithic. There are subgroups and differences inside each community, and those change over time. Some people are activists, others aren't, what you might call the silent majority within the minority. And if we are not careful, our projects will have a bias toward the activists, those with the strongest identities or the loudest voices, those that will come forward willingly. At the same time, how can we identify and distinguish those multiple communities? Well, I would say that the best solution is always to rely on self-identification, letting members of those communities define themselves, since defining them might lead to imposing labels on them. The concept of societal provenance is also interesting because members of ethnic communities, minorities in general, often face fragmented, dispersed, and limited archival sources. And this comes in part from the archive's traditional organizational structure based on provenance. But maybe not all records need to have clearly identified individual organizational creators. Cultural artifacts, cultural heritage in general, emanate from a community as a whole, so maybe they can and should be documented as such, rather than the papers of an individual or the records of an organization. Another useful concept is archival stewardship. Although archivists like to have full control over their collections, I try to show that collaboration and shared decision-making help establish and maintain trust with communities of interest. Also, archivists should always document their own decisions and actions so that future curators and users of the collections understand the rationale behind the choices made in the creation of the collection, as well as its strengths and limitations. And finally, even when we are in the early stages of planning outreach efforts, we need to think of the sustainability of the collections that may result from our efforts. And I'll conclude here. I think I'm over time even, so thank you.
Well, next we're going to hear from Linda Trujillo.
Actually, it's going to be John.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. This is John. Thank you, Dominique. That was a very interesting presentation. I look forward to learning a lot more. I'm going to take you all through 2 New York projects, one statewide, and if there's time, one based in Rochester. The first began in 2000 and ended in 2002 with the publication of a guide to documenting Latino, Hispanic history and culture in New York State, a project of the New York State Archives. The second, based on the methodology and principles developed in the guide, was a joint project of the Latino Alliance and the Rochester Museum and Science Center, both in Rochester. This project comes from a largely white mainstream institution, the New York State Archives, that was working to be meaningfully and effectively cooperative and inclusive in its partnerships with communities of color and marginalized communities. My focus here is on the principles central to that process. First, a quick caveat. The terms Latino and Hispanic are widely used to name the same populations and cultures, and there is internal disagreement within some of those communities as to which term to use. We use both interchangeably in our publications. Also, regarding gender, we've used the Latino/A and Latino now in our materials. Now in the new gender-neutral term Latinx, L-A-T-I-N-X, it's becoming rapidly adopted, and though it's not in these slides, I may use it in place of Latino/A as I speak. There we go. In 1998, the State Historical Records Advisory Board Strategic Plan was released, and among its 3 common themes were collaboration and cooperation, which were expected to be, quote, infused in the development of the goals and objectives outlined in the plan, and were considered essential to achieving its vision. I was co-chair of SHRAB at that time, and I can assure you that it took some work with the strong support of our project director, Kathleen Rowe, to give these 2 themes the centrality they had in the plan. Fortunately, the State Archives took those themes seriously, and in 1999, with funding from the NHPRC, launched the New York Heritage Documentation Project. This project developed a documentation planning model and tested it in 3 topic areas: Latinx history and culture, mental health, and environmental affairs. The process was designed to answer the question, if a repository or a records creating group in one of these areas wanted to contribute to the documentation of this topic, how would they go about it? And it's designed to be used in other topic areas as well. So why Latino history and culture? Latinos are the largest minority population in New York, and they're found in every major city and many rural areas throughout the state. They participate, of course, and contribute to every aspect of social, political, economic, and cultural life. So they represent a population slice across all of human experience in New York State. And the history of Latinos in New York has been severely underrepresented in the accessible historical record over time. So the heart of the matter. So the heart of the matter for this project is diversity inclusion, A to Z. Inclusion must begin at a project's inception. If you're a largely white, professional, middle-class organization, and you're going to be working with more diverse communities, and why wouldn't you be, you'd better have strong people from those communities at the table as equal partners from the beginning, helping you to design and shape the project. Otherwise, you're perpetuating the top-down, patronizing dynamic that is instantly recognizable by marginalized communities. And regaining their authentic participation and trust later on in the project will be much harder, if possible at all. On the other hand, if you are significantly inclusive from the beginning and the individuals you include are heard and respected and listened to, they will carry that message out. Your job will be easier and the outcomes will be much better. In our case, Nelida Perez, who was the director of the Centro de Estudios Puertorriqueños in New York City, and their archivist, helped draft the 1998 SHRAB strategic plan. So she was there at the very inception of this whole idea. During the project itself, she was the principal partner and guide and mentor in designing the project and in its execution all the way through. She was my mentor. I was coordinator of the project, and she and I worked very closely together, and she essentially provided the guidance that I needed to navigate this community as best I could. The statewide consultations with Hispanic communities across New York included 6 focus group-like meetings. We had about 12 to 20 people in them, representing almost all the ethnicities, Hispanic ethnicities in each area, many walks of life, people from scholars, activists, business people, educators, religious figures, all kinds of folks were involved in these. And we asked them in large groups, in these groups, to identify what they thought were the key topics and issues and events and trends and institutions and individuals who had shaped Latino history since 1945 in their region. And for many of these communities, especially upstate communities, that's about when Latino immigration and participation in the community begins, is in the late 40s and mid-50s. As coordinator of the project, I took the data from all of these meetings and conversations that we had with people, put them in the form of a guide and in a draft, and we worked on the draft internally, and it went through lots of changes. When we had it in pretty good shape, we thought we sent it out to all the people who had participated in all of these conversations and asked for their input. Sometimes I initiated the follow-up, and sometimes because I wanted to hear what a particular person had to say, sometimes they initiated it because they had something they wanted to tell us. So the final product incorporated everyone's input. Here, just for your information, is one of the basic set of subject matter of topics that they thought were critically important to document. This is out of a much longer list. These are the ones that rose to the top. And the themes were not topics that people suggested that they wanted documented, but this is something that we kind of came to at the end of the project, that these were critical issues in the Latino communities in New York, and they permeated all of the topics. So they weren't topics themselves, but they were central to the framework within which people thought about their history. So another hit at the heart of the matter: who's here and who's missing. So it's important in any documentation project to work with the stakeholders throughout, and to ask, and also to ask, so who's not here but should be? If you look around, you might there's an obvious group of people that show up. If you start talking to people, that you ask them who do you know who can contribute, and you end up with a group of people. But who don't those people invite? So think about race, class, gender, ethnicity, faith, occupation, whatever the categories that are relevant in that community. Because the deepest experience and expertise are in those communities, and if they are heard and they are and their priorities and contributions and their records are contributed, the project will reflect their lives and priorities and be better for it. They own and support the project, and are much more likely to engage the rest of their community in perhaps thinking about historical records and participating in the project. Very quickly, an example, if I have time. I don't think I have time. I'll do this very quickly. In Rochester, the Latino community, we had not had a focus group meeting there. Someone called me and said, we want to participate in this. I went up and met with them. A very strong group of people came together who were very interested in this project, wanted their history to be represented. We partnered with the Rochester Museum and Science Center, which was an unlikely partnership, but found receptivity there. They negotiated a really strong agreement with the Alliance, negotiated a strong agreement with the the repository that gave them equal responsibility and authority over how the project went. So they maintained that relationship. And there are now important collections there from that community. And I just learned 2 days ago that the son of one of the first immigrants to that community, who had been had been the first Latino to do this and that, has just come to donate. His father died. He came to have his papers donated. So that's essentially here. What's the next 3 slides, which you'll see when if you look at these online after this is all over, is just some outcomes and so forth to date. And then on this slide, the resources will be live links later on. So that's it, and if there's time for Q&A, I welcome any further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. And now we'll hear from Linda.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. Today I'm just going to share a little bit about our efforts here in New Mexico to help preserve New Mexico's rich heritage through our outreach to the Native American populations in New Mexico. Let me get to the next slide here. There we go. So like all other states, we have a State Historical Records Advisory Board, a SHRAB. Ours is an adjunct board of the Commission of Public Records. 2 years ago, we worked with the Governor's Office to reassign authority from the Governor to the Commission of Public Records. And we did this in order to obtain greater autonomy and to ensure diversity in the membership. The mission of the board is to provide support for local communities through grant funding and training. Featured in this picture on this slide is the Laguna Pueblo. As you can see, the Pueblo is surrounded by enchanted mesas and is situated at the foothills of Mount Taylor. Laguna is located 45 miles west of Albuquerque. The Pueblo consists of approximately 500,000 acres of land that are situated on 4 counties. The residents of Laguna live in 6 villages, and the Tribal Administration Building is located in the village of Laguna. By rule, the New Mexico HRAB must be a broad representation of the archives, records offices, research institutions, and organizations of New Mexico. Our state historian, Dr. Rick Hendricks, serves as the co-chair and is responsible for the administrative functions of the board. Rick has decades of experience working with Native American communities throughout New Mexico. Archivist Ryan Flahive works at the Institute of American Indian Arts. The mission of IAIA is to empower creativity and leadership in Native American arts and cultures through education, lifelong learning, and outreach. We also have museum specialist Melvin Saraceno, who represents the Laguna and Acoma Pueblos in New Mexico. One of our most actively involved and passionate members is archivist Dr. Willow Powers. Dr. Powers has decades of experience helping Native Americans cultivate their archives. She spends countless hours working directly with Pueblo leaders throughout northern New Mexico. The most important aspect of the HRAB is to build trust with our Native American populations. As in all things, this takes time and requires resources to travel. The board's adopted 5 objectives that really help us reach out to our Native American populations. The first one of those objectives is to preserve New Mexico's records. We know that many of our Native American historical records are in danger of being lost and forgotten, irreparably damaged or destroyed. The second objective that helps us reach out to the Native American population is actually meeting the public demand for access to historical records. Similar to other places, and I think, you know, in many, not just the United States, but around the world, there's a heightened interest in accessing historical records. And here in New Mexico, the interest in the history of our Native American populations is growing very fast. The other objective is the funding and resources for records programs. By helping our Native American population communities with funding, we've helped them focus on the development of a records management program for their contemporary records and the creation of archival repositories for long-term preservation and conservation. Featured here is the Acoma Pueblo. The word Acoma denotes a place always prepared. There is a difference of opinion as to the age of the Acoma Nation. Traditional Acoma history, oral history, reflects on a time far beyond our imagination, a time of creation and emergence into the world. Recent excavations on Acoma Mesa tend to suggest that Acoma was inhabited before the time of Christ. Archaeologists agree that it's been continuously occupied from at least AD 1200. So a question that comes up fairly regularly is how many different Native American populations are represented in New Mexico? We have 19 pueblos. We also have the Jicarilla Apache Nation, the Mescalero Apache tribe, and the Navajo Nation represented in New Mexico. Featured on this slide is a picture of a Jemez Pueblo buffalo dancer. The Pueblo of Jemez is a sovereign nation located in Sandoval County. It's approximately 55 miles northwest of Albuquerque. As one of the 19 New Mexico Pueblos, it is a federally recognized tribe with approximately 3,400 tribal members, with about 58% of that number living in Jemez. Most Native American historical records are shared orally from one generation to the next. So having an archive has been a bit of a challenge for many of our populations. So we look at other areas that need to be preserved. Art is an important part of the history of our Native American populations. An example of how important it is can be seen in Santa Fe during Indian Market Weekend. It's the weekend after Labor Day weekend, and the historic downtown plaza transforms into a large Native American arts market and exhibit. To be admitted to the Santa Fe Indian Market, you have to be juried in by your peers, and your entrance is based on proof of authenticity of materials and the practice. Also featured here is one of my favorites, R.C. Gorman, a very popular artist, as well as Leslie Marmon Silko, who is an author. So what do we do to outreach? Our outreach efforts are predominantly going to the Pueblos and working directly with the leadership. And we do this to help develop a records management program and to identify historical records. We also have a memorandum of agreement with the Northern Rio Grande National Heritage Area. That is a federally identified area. The purpose of the MOA is to reach out to Native American communities to further the development of their archives and records management programs. The most memorable event for me in this process was the finalizing of a loan agreement between us and the Pueblo of Santa Ana on December 3rd, 2013. The governor of Santa Ana and his staff attended the meeting, and it was a big representation of their staff. They had a tribal historical preservation officer, cultural resource coordinator, their Pueblo religious leader, as well as a special counsel. They gave us the records on loan, and we don't usually agree to that, but we did agree to it in this case because the records were so important. They gave us permission, though, to help fix any of the records that needed to be repaired, to make copies, to digitize the records and make copies available to the public as well as the Pueblo. The records basically include land records that establish the boundaries of the area that belongs to the Pueblo. Some of the documents date back to 1709 and document Santa Ana's acquisition of land over time. These documents, as you can imagine, are very important to the Pueblo. The governor explained that the documents exist because they have been handed down from governor to governor in a box tied with string. His father and grandfather during the holidays would open the box and read them as they were in Spanish. He expressed his appreciation to the Commission for housing the documents and hoped that the Pueblo and the Records and Archives Center would have a long-lasting relationship in preserving these records and making them available to the public. After the Commission accepted the records and everyone had an opportunity to talk about why this was important to them, the tribal religious leader offered a prayer, and then we took the records immediately down to the archives. And it was a pretty exciting and memorable event, and it had taken a little over a year for us to work out that loaning agreement. So here's a couple of the successful projects that we've given money to through the HRAB, specifically to the IAIA. They have received a grant for $8,348, and they used that grant to purchase archival supplies. And it was basically to preserve and rehouse and describe 60 feet of personal papers of the founder. The Institute is a public institution and welcomes applications from everywhere. Anybody who is interested in the study, creation, application, preservation, and contemporary expression of American Indian and Alaskan Native arts and culture. A large percentage of the student body are, in fact, American Indians and Alaska Natives. Another project was $5,000 to the Navajo Nation to help them develop a records management system. They were able to take microfilm 60 boxes of their government permanent records. The Navajo Nation extends into the states of Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico, covering over 27,000 square miles. It's larger than 10 of the 50 states in America, in fact. It's very, very large. Another project that we've worked with is the Santa Clara Pueblo, and they got a little over almost $8,500, and that was to digitize audio tapes, photographs, and VHS tapes. Santa Clara is also has a very large land base, which makes it very difficult for them to travel the area. Another project that we have is the Taos Pueblo, and this is a project that we recently helped them complete, and they worked very hard. They provided some actually a lot more matching than we asked them to, but it was to process and rehouse their original enrollment documents and to put those documents that they have into archival standard folders. We also helped to train their staff, and they had been having problems over the years in identifying who actually could qualify as being a registered tribal member. So this was a big project for them, and it will help the community in the future in a very, really positive manner. Another project that we have is working with the Indian Pueblo Culture Center, which is in Albuquerque, and they got a grant for $8,500, and what they did is they created some online access to documents that were actually housed at NARA. And the reason is because many of the Native American populations here in New Mexico will never have an opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. And so bringing these reels of microfilm and images down here to Mexico and making them available also provided access to the population here who would never have that ability to travel. The Indian Pueblo Culture Center, like I said, is located in New Mexico. It was founded in 1976 and is jointly owned and operated by the 19 Pueblos of New Mexico. It's located in the historic Albuquerque Indian School District, which is just minutes from downtown and Old Town Albuquerque. The Indian Pueblo Cultural Center is a world-class museum, and cultural center that was created to be a place where Pueblo people can tell their stories. And that's it.
Well, it's fascinating. All three very different, but really, really important talks. Do we have any questions? I guess one that I had for Linda, you mentioned the Santa Clara Pueblo, I think, and I found it fascinating the issue of using archival documentation to provide a means to better verify application for membership within the nation. Is that a pretty common issue?
I forgot I was on mute. It's actually the Taos Pueblo that was having that problem, but it is a very common issue. And they have the responsibility of keeping those records there on their, you know, in their care. And, you know, it's only been recently that they've even created those kind of records. And so, you know, going into a Pueblo and finding them on, you know, 3x5 cards or paper that isn't even the same size and in no specific order is a pretty common occurrence.
I know it's an issue with the North Carolina Cherokee, and I'm sure it is with many other Native American groups as well. And I had a question for Dominique as well. You know, I was interested in, as you were laying out the projects, Minnesota 2.0, and it makes a lot of sense, really helps capture or tap into a younger cohort. Did you see any sort of different sorts of patterns with the other projects that you've looked at?
From the point of view of the target, I mean the age of the participants?
Age, you know, patterns writ large. You know, age would be obvious. You know, gender, religious affiliation within various communities. Did you see any other patterns like that develop with the other projects, particularly the ones that are where the members themselves are sort of driving the bus?
Yeah, well, in the case you're talking about, the microhistories, there were the participants are all over the place in terms of age and gender. I mean, especially they also come from all the different countries of the world. But I would say that they were older for sure than the ones in the Minnesota 2.0. I haven't seen any other example of teenagers or young people like that archived anywhere, frankly. So in the case of the microhistories, it's more people in their 20s or all the way to their, you know, 60s or more. And that's one of the problems, if you want, of this kind of project, is that you don't choose who is going to answer the call. So there may be things that are missing and people that you're not going to hear from. You know, it's those who actually don't provide any story might be the one you want to document the most, because they could be, for all kinds of reasons, they don't want to speak up publicly. But their stories might be interesting to, you know, to have. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I would say.
It does. Here we have a question from someone from the Minnesota Historical Society. Do you have, and I guess this is to each of our speakers, do you have any ideas for how to reach out to people who are mistrustful or doubtful of your project?
This is John. I have a thought about that, which is that I think in many cases, if you're representing a mainstream institution and you're dealing with marginalized communities, it's very likely that most people will have some suspicion about about your motives and what might happen. And I think the key thing, one of the key things, is to find one person somewhere who can provide entree to that community. Somebody who, through a personal connection or through a connection with the institution, has a relationship and has a relationship with archives as a field, or with you, or, you know, and begin from there. Begin with one person and have one person invite a few of their friends. It's a kind of a community organizing approach that I think can work, and often is when I was organizing the meetings in Rochester, or the focus group meetings. That's what I did. I called one person, and who do you know? And pretty soon, certain people certain names showed up. Everybody points to this person or that person, and you start to get a feel for whom you can have a conversation with that will build trust gradually over time.
What's really important with the Native American populations, and I suspect this is the case around the country, is that it's important to remember that there's a whole population out there that doesn't necessarily link themselves to any tribe or population. But if you're looking to start, reaching out to a specific group, reaching out to the leadership, and because Native American Pueblos are sovereign communities here in the United States, you have a leadership that you can go out and reach to, whether it's a governor or, there's different names for the tribal leaders. Here in New Mexico, they're predominantly governors. But that's that leadership that you can reach out to, and once you've got their trust and they support what you're trying to help them do and are interested in moving forward the preservation of their documents, even if it's from here forward, then you have much greater buy-in.
This is Dominique. I was just going to add that my answer would be exactly the same as John's. I think it often starts with just one person, and which may not be easy to do, finding the right person who's going to both be willing to talk to you and then be a good spokesperson within their own community. But once you have that, in my experience of all the projects I've looked at, this is how it can start, how the project can start.
Well, there don't appear to be any other answers, and we've reached the end of our hour. So before I turn it over to Danya, I want to thank Dominique, John, and Linda for terrific presentations today. I want to thank all of you who joined us for being on board. So Danya?
All right, thank you, John. Just as a reminder, for those of you who may not have registered yet, starting next week is our CoSA SAA Joint Annual Meeting in Atlanta. So be sure to stop by the CoSA desk and say hi. I'm also going to put in a plug for the silent auction that we're doing. So come by on Thursday between 10 and 3:30, if I remember correctly. Our August member webinar will be the wrap-up of the annual meeting. So for those of you who aren't able to join us, you'll be able to get all the information. And then September, we're going to have another SHRAB Town Hall. So as you saw from today, a lot of these projects are done through the SHRABs, so please join us for that. And then October, we're doing our Collaborative History Day projects webinar. So please be thinking about that. And as always, each year, CoSA's corporate partnerships provide critical funding support for many CoSA membership activities and events. We are especially grateful to Ancestry and our other corporate sponsors featured here. And we are also generously provided grants from NHPRC and IMLF. I've lost my... Oh, okay. Don't forget to fill out the webinar evaluation that you will get when you sign up from the webinar. And please don't forget to stay connected with CoSA through the website, through our Facebook page, through our blog, and through Twitter. So thank you all very much for joining us today. And keep an eye on the website. The recording and the slides for this webinar will be going up within the week. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you in Atlanta.